The morning sun blazed over the Rocky Mountains of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. The SEAL team had been watching the compound below for 6 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Through her scope, she could see 3 high-value targets moving around the fortified building, like they owned the world. Commander Jake Morrison crouched beside her, studying the terrain through his binoculars. The distance was extreme, nearly 100 to 200 meters across a valley filled with swirling wind and heat mirages. Even for an experienced sniper, it would be a challenging shot. For what the commander was thinking, it seemed downright impossible. "Santos, I need you to take out all 3 targets," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Intelligence says they're planning to move in the next 30 minutes. This might be our only chance." Maria kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching the targets through the shimmering heat. The first man, a tall figure in white robes, was the regional Taliban commander responsible for dozens of attacks on coalition forces. The second target, shorter but stockier, was the bomb maker who had been terrorizing local villages. The third man, constantly moving and gesturing with his hands, was the communications expert who coordinated attacks across 3 provinces. "Ma'am," with respect, Morrison continued, "that shot's impossible. The distance, the wind, the heat distortion, you'd need a miracle to hit even one of them, let alone all 3. Maria had heard similar doubts throughout her military career. Growing up in rural Texas, she had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bike. Her father, a former Marine, had taught her that shooting wasn't just about pulling a trigger. It was about understanding wind, distance, breathing, and most importantly, patience. The other team members shifted nervously behind cover. They had been in position since before dawn, and everyone knew that every minute they stayed increased their chances of being discovered. The enemy compound was heavily guarded, and if their position was compromised, extraction would become a nightmare. Maria studied the wind patterns, watching dust devils dance across the valley floor. She calculated the bullet drop, the wind drift, and the time it would take for her shots to reach their targets. In her mind, she mapped out the sequence: 3 shots, 3 different positions, all within a matter of seconds. "Commander," she said quietly, never taking her eye off the scope, "I understand your concern, but I need you to trust me on this one." Morrison looked at her with a mixture of respect and worry. Santos had already proven herself multiple times during their deployment. Her previous confirmed kills had saved countless lives, but this situation was different. The stakes were higher, the conditions more challenging, and failure would mean losing 3 of the most wanted terrorists in the region. The radio crackled softly with updates from the observation posts. Enemy movement was increasing around the compound. Guards were becoming more alert, and intelligence suggested that the targets might be preparing to leave sooner than expected. Maria felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone. That every sniper knows that place where time seems to stop and the world narrows down to the crosshairs and the target. She had been in this state hundreds of times during training and combat, but never with so much riding on 3 consecutive shots. The wind died down momentarily, creating a brief window of opportunity. Through her scope, she could see all 3 targets clearly. They were positioned in different areas of the compound's courtyard, moving in patterns she had been observing all morning. "Range is 1,187 meters, she whispered to Morrison. "Wind is variable, 3 to 5 miles per hour from the northeast. I can make these shots, but I need complete radio silence for the next 2 minutes." Morrison nodded and signaled to the rest of the team. Everyone understood that the next few moments would determine the success or failure of their entire mission. The intelligence value of eliminating these 3 targets could not be overstated. They were the backbone of terrorist operations in the entire region. Maria took a deep breath and let half of it out, just as her father had taught her years ago on the family ranch. Her finger found the trigger, and she began to apply the steady pressure that would send the first bullet on its deadly journey across the valley. The first shot rang out across the valley with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Maria didn't wait to see the result. She was already shifting her position slightly, adjusting for the second target, who had moved closer to the building's entrance. Through her peripheral vision, she saw the tall commander in white robes suddenly crumple to the ground. The other men in the compound began looking around frantically, trying to understand where the shot had come from. They had no idea that death was already traveling toward the second target. Maria's breathing remained steady as she tracked the bomb maker through her scope. He was moving more quickly now, sensing danger but not knowing where to run. The distance and angle were slightly different for this shot, requiring a minute adjustment to her aim. The second bullet left the barrel just as the bomb maker reached for his radio. The shot took exactly 2.1 seconds to cross the valley, and by the time the sound reached the compound, the second target was already falling. Commander Morrison watched through his binoculars with growing amazement. What he was witnessing went against everything he thought he knew about long-range shooting. 2 perfect shots in less than 10 seconds, both at extreme range under difficult conditions. Chaos erupted in the compound below. Guards were running in all directions, some taking cover while others tried to help the fallen men. The third target, the communications expert, was now running toward a covered area near the main building. Maria had anticipated this reaction. During her hours of observation, she had noticed that when people in the compound felt threatened, they always ran to the same covered area. It was human nature to seek the closest shelter, and she had planned her third shot accordingly. The communications expert was moving fast, but Maria had calculated his likely path. She led the target slightly, accounting for his speed and direction. This shot was the most challenging because the target was moving unpredictably, zigzagging as he ran. But Maria had trained for situations exactly like this. During her time at sniper school, instructors had pushed her to make impossible shots under pressure. They had taught her to trust her instincts and to shoot without overthinking. The third shot came less than 15 seconds after the first. The communications expert was only 3 steps away from cover when the bullet found its mark. He collapsed just outside the doorway he had been desperately trying to reach. The entire compound fell silent, except for the shouting of confused guards. 3 of the most dangerous terrorists in Afghanistan had been eliminated, in less than 20 seconds by a sniper they couldn't even see. Morrison lowered his binoculars and stared at Maria with an expression of complete disbelief. "How did you—" he started to ask, but the words wouldn't come. Maria finally lifted her head from the scope and looked at her commanding officer. "My father always told me that impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried hard enough to do," she said simply. The radio burst to life with urgent communications from headquarters. Drone surveillance had confirmed all 3 kills, and intelligence teams were already analyzing the immediate impact on enemy operations in the region. "Santos," Morrison said, finding his voice again. "In 15 years of military service, I have never seen anything like what you just accomplished." Maria was already packing up her rifle, moving with the practiced efficiency of a professional soldier. "Sir, we should probably start thinking about extraction. The compound is going to be swarming with reinforcements soon." But Morrison wasn't ready to move yet. He needed to understand what he had just witnessed. That third shot, the target was moving, there was wind, the distance was extreme. How did you know where to aim? Maria paused in her packing and looked across the valley at the compound below. "Commander, sometimes you have to stop calculating and start trusting. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. At some point it stops being about the math and starts being about feel." The sound of helicopters could be heard in the distance, enemy reinforcements responding to the attack. The team needed to move quickly to avoid being trapped in their position. As they prepared to withdraw, Morrison realized that he had just witnessed something that would be talked about in military circles for years to come. 3 impossible shots, 3 confirmed kills, and a demonstration of skill that redefined what he thought was possible in combat. The helicopter extraction was tense but successful. As the Black Hawk lifted off from the landing zone, Maria looked down at the compound that was now swarming with enemy vehicles. She had never felt the weight of her actions as heavily as she did in that moment. Back at the forward operating base, word of the mission spread quickly through the ranks. 3 high-value targets eliminated with 3 shots from over a kilometer away. Soldiers who had been fighting these same terrorists for months couldn't believe what they were hearing. Captain Rodriguez, the base intelligence officer, was waiting for them when they landed. "Santos, I need to debrief you immediately. Washington is asking for a detailed report on exactly how you made those shots." Maria felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She had always preferred to do her job quietly and move on to the next mission. But she understood that what had happened was unusual, even by special operations standards. In the debriefing room, she walked through each shot step by step. The wind conditions, the calculations, the timing, everything was recorded and analyzed. Military experts would study this engagement for years, trying to understand how such an incredible feat had been accomplished. The first target was stationary, which made the shot challenging but manageable, Maria explained to the room full of officers. The key was reading the wind patterns and accounting for the extreme range. Colonel Williams, the base commander, interrupted her. Santos, according to our ballistics experts, that first shot alone should have been nearly impossible. The conditions you describe shouldn't have allowed for such accuracy, Maria shrugged. Sir, I grew up shooting prairie dogs at 800 meters with my dad's old hunting rifle. When you learn to shoot in Texas wind, everything else seems easier. The room erupted in quiet laughter, but everyone knew there was more to it than childhood training. What Maria had accomplished required a combination of skill, training, instinct, and perhaps a little luck that few snipers would ever possess. Commander Morrison spoke up from the back of the room. The second and third shots were what really amazed me. After the first target went down, the compound was in chaos. Making accurate shots with people running around, confusion everywhere, that takes nerves of steel. Maria thought back to those moments. The second target was actually easier because he moved into a position I had already ranged during my preparation. The third shot was the hardest because he was moving unpredictably, but I had studied his movement patterns for hours before the engagement. What she didn't tell them was about the moment of doubt she had felt before the third shot. For just an instant she had wondered if she was pushing her luck too far. 3 consecutive impossible shots seemed like asking too much of fate. But her training had taken over. Years of practice, thousands of rounds fired at ranges across the world, and the discipline drilled into her by the best instructors in the military. When the moment came, her body knew what to do even when her mind was questioning. Dr. Sarah Chen, the base psychologist, was particularly interested in Maria's mental state during the engagement. How did you handle the pressure of knowing that 3 shots had to be perfect? That there was no room for error? Maria considered the question carefully. Ma'am, I think the key was focusing on 1 shot at a time. I didn't think about the second shot while taking the first, and I didn't think about the third shot while taking the second. Each one was its own individual challenge. The intelligence value of the mission was already becoming clear. Without their 3 key leaders, the terrorist network in the region was falling apart. Communications were disrupted, planned attacks were being canceled, and local commanders were fighting among themselves for control. Santos, Colonel Williams said as the debriefing concluded, I want you to know that your actions today likely saved hundreds of lives. Those 3 men were responsible for coordinating attacks across multiple provinces. But even as she accepted the praise, Maria's mind was already moving to the next mission. She had learned long ago that dwelling on past successes could be dangerous in her line of work. Every shot was different, every situation unique. That evening, as she cleaned her rifle in the armory, Commander Morrison found her. I owe you an apology, he said. When I said those shots were impossible, I was speaking from my own limitations, not yours. Maria looked up from her weapon maintenance. Sir, you weren't wrong to be skeptical. On paper, those shots shouldn't have worked. Sometimes in combat, you have to attempt things that logic says you can't do. 3 weeks after the mission, Maria found herself in an unexpected situation. She was sitting in a briefing room at the Pentagon, surrounded by generals, defense contractors, and weapons experts who wanted to understand exactly how she had accomplished what many considered impossible. The room was filled with charts, ballistics calculations, and computer simulations that attempted to recreate her shots. Despite all their technology and expertise, the analysts were struggling to explain how the third shot in particular had been successful. General Patricia Hayes, a decorated officer who had spent 30 years in special operations, led the discussion. Sergeant Santos, our computer models show that the probability of successfully making all 3 shots under those conditions was less than 2%. Maria felt out of place among all the high-ranking officers and civilians. Ma'am, I didn't calculate probabilities before taking those shots. I just focused on making them count. Dr. Michael Thompson, a ballistics expert from the weapons development program, showed her a computer simulation of her shots. According to our analysis, the wind conditions alone should have made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Can you explain how you compensated for the variables? Looking at the complex diagrams and calculations, Maria realized that these experts were trying to turn her instinctive shooting into a science. They wanted formulas and equations for something that had been largely based on feel and experience. "Dr. Thompson, I think you're overcomplicating it," she said. "When I was growing up, my father taught me to read wind by watching grass, dust, and heat shimmer. You don't need a computer to tell you which way the wind is blowing." The room fell silent. Here was a young sergeant from Texas telling some of the military's top experts that their sophisticated analysis was missing the point. Colonel James Park, a former sniper instructor, spoke up from the corner of the room. "Gentlemen, I think Sergeant Santos is right. We're trying to quantify something that's part art, part science, and part instinct. Some shooters have it, most don't." But the weapons contractors weren't satisfied with that explanation. They were hoping to learn something from Maria's techniques that could be applied to training programs or even automated weapon systems. "Sergeant," said Robert Klein from Advanced Defense Systems, "if we could understand your decision-making process, we might be able to develop training simulators that could teach other snipers to shoot with similar accuracy." Maria shook her head. "Sir, with respect, you can't simulate 20 years of shooting experience or the feel of wind on your face. Some things have to be learned the hard way." The discussion continued for hours, but Maria could see that the experts were frustrated. They wanted concrete answers to questions that didn't have simple solutions. How do you teach someone to trust their instincts? How do you quantify the years of practice that allow a shooter to make split-second adjustments? During a break, General Hayes approached Maria privately. "Sergeant, I want you to know that your mission has had far-reaching effects. Intelligence reports indicate that terrorist operations in that entire region have been severely disrupted." Maria appreciated the update, but she was more concerned about getting back to her unit. "Ma'am, when can I return to my team? They're still deployed and I feel like I should be with them." "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you," the general said. "There's an opportunity for you to help develop new training programs for military snipers. Your techniques could benefit hundreds of future soldiers." The idea of becoming an instructor appealed to Maria in some ways, but she wasn't ready to leave operational duty. "General, I appreciate the offer, but I joined the military to serve in combat, not to sit in classrooms." General Hayes smiled. "I understand that feeling, Sergeant, but consider this. If you can teach even 10 snipers to shoot half as well as you do, the impact on future missions could be enormous." That evening, Maria called her father from the Pentagon guest quarters. Tom Santos had been following news reports about his daughter's mission, though the military had released very few details to the public. "Dad, they want me to become an instructor," she told him. "They think I can teach other soldiers to make the kind of shots I made in Afghanistan." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Mija, do you remember when you made your first long shot on that coyote when you were 12? You asked me how I knew you could make it. You said some people are born with steady hands and good eyes," Maria remembered. "That's right. But more importantly, I said that natural ability means nothing without practice and discipline. If you can teach soldiers those things, you'll save more lives as an instructor than you ever could in combat." As Maria hung up the phone, she realized her father was probably right. The mission in Afghanistan had proven what she could accomplish as an individual shooter. But the real challenge might be passing those skills on to others. 6 months later, Maria found herself at the Army Sniper School in Fort Benning, Georgia, facing her first class of students. 20 experienced soldiers from various units had been selected for advanced training, and they all knew about her legendary shots in Afghanistan. The pressure was different, but just as intense as combat. These soldiers were looking to her for skills that could mean the difference between life and death in future missions. But Maria quickly discovered that teaching shooting was much harder than actually doing it. "Sergeant Santos," asked Private First Class Johnson during the first week, "can you show us exactly how you calculated wind drift for those shots in Afghanistan?" Maria looked at the eager faces staring at her and realized the challenge she faced. "Johnson, I didn't calculate wind drift in the traditional sense. I felt it, observed it, and adjusted for it based on experience." The students looked confused. They had expected formulas, specific techniques, and step-by-step procedures. Instead, they were getting answers that seemed almost mystical. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the school's senior instructor, pulled Maria aside after the first day. "Santos, these soldiers need concrete skills they can apply. You can't just tell them to feel the wind." "But that's exactly what you have to do," Maria replied. "You can teach the basics of ballistics and wind reading, but the advanced stuff, the shots that really matter, those come from somewhere else." Over the following weeks, Maria developed her own teaching methods. Instead of focusing on complex calculations, she took students to the range in different weather conditions and taught them to observe everything around them. "Watch the grass," she told them during a windy morning session. "See how it bends? That tells you wind direction and approximate speed. Now look at the heat shimmer rising from the ground. That affects how you see your target." Slowly, some students began to understand. Private Martinez, a young sniper from Texas like Maria, started making shots that surprised even the instructors. But others struggled with the concept of intuitive shooting. "Ma'am," said Staff Sergeant Thompson after missing several long-range targets, "I understand the theory, but I can't seem to put it together like you do." Maria worked with Thompson individually, trying different approaches. "Don't think so much," she told him. "Trust your first instinct about where to aim. Overthinking kills accuracy." The breakthrough came during the 4th week when Maria decided to share the full story of her childhood training. She told the students about learning to shoot prairie dogs with her father, about the thousands of rounds fired at different ranges and conditions. "The shots in Afghanistan weren't magic," she explained. "They were the result of 20 years of practice. Every shot you take here, every hour you spend on the range, it all builds toward that moment when you have to perform under pressure." Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the few female students in the class, raised her hand. "Sergeant, how do you handle the pressure of knowing that people are counting on you to make impossible shots?" Maria thought about the question carefully. "Kim, the key is not thinking about it as impossible. Every shot is just another shot. You prepare the best you can, you trust your training, and you execute." As the course progressed, Maria began to see real improvement in her students. More importantly, she was learning to articulate skills that she had always taken for granted. Teaching forced her to break down her instincts into understandable components. Commander Morrison visited the school during the final week of the course. He watched Maria working with students on the range and was amazed by the transformation in her teaching abilities. "Santos, when I first met you, I never would have guessed you'd become such an effective instructor," he said during a break in training. "Sir, I'm learning as much as they are," Maria replied, "teaching me how to explain things I've always just done naturally." The final test for the course was a challenging long-range scenario designed to simulate combat conditions. Students had to engage multiple targets at varying distances under time pressure and with simulated stress. Private Martinez successfully engaged 3 targets at ranges exceeding 900 meters, a feat that would have been impossible for him 6 weeks earlier. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had struggled initially, managed to hit 2 difficult targets that required significant wind adjustments. But the real success wasn't measured in individual scores. Maria had managed to teach her students something more valuable than specific techniques. She had taught them to trust themselves and to push beyond what they thought was possible. "Ma'am," Private Johnson said as the course concluded, "I finally understand what you meant about feeling the shot. It's not about the calculations, it's about confidence." Maria smiled as she watched her first-class graduate. Each student would return to their units with improved skills, but more importantly, they would carry with them the knowledge that impossible shots weren't really impossible. They just required better preparation and more confidence. 2 years after her legendary shots in Afghanistan, Maria received news that would bring her story full circle. Intelligence reports indicated that terrorist activity in the region where she had eliminated the 3 leaders remained at historic lows. The disruption caused by her mission had fundamentally changed the security situation, but more importantly, several of her former students had been deployed to combat zones and were reporting successful missions of their own. Private Martinez had made a crucial shot in Syria that saved his entire patrol. Staff Sergeant Thompson had successfully engaged enemy snipers in Iraq using techniques he learned in Maria's class. Maria was now a sergeant first class and had been assigned to develop advanced training programs for the entire Army sniper community. Her methods were being studied and adapted by military forces around the world. "Santos," said General Hayes during a visit to Fort Benning, "your impact on military sniper training has been extraordinary. We're seeing measurable improvements in accuracy and confidence across all our sniper programs. But Maria remained focused on the individual soldiers she was training rather than the broader impact of her work. Each new class brought different challenges and opportunities to refine her teaching methods. During one particularly memorable session, she was working with a student who reminded her of herself at a younger age. Corporal Lisa Chen was a naturally gifted shooter who struggled with self-doubt despite her obvious abilities. "Ma'am, I can hit targets all day on the range, but I'm worried about performing under real combat pressure," Chen confided after a training session. Maria sat down with the young soldier and shared something she had never told any of her previous students. "Chen, right before I took that third shot in Afghanistan, the impossible one, I had a moment of doubt. For just a second I wondered if I was asking too much of myself." "What did you do?" Chen asked. "I remembered something my father told me when I was learning to shoot. He said that doubt is just fear wearing a disguise. The cure for both is preparation and practice." Chen nodded, but Maria could see she needed more than just words. Over the following weeks, Maria worked intensively with the corporal, gradually building her confidence through increasingly challenging scenarios. The transformation was remarkable. By the end of the course, Chen was making shots that impressed even the most experienced instructors. More importantly, she had developed the mental toughness needed to perform under pressure. Commander Morrison, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, returned for another visit to the school. As he watched Maria working with her students, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning in Afghanistan. "You know, Santos," he said during their conversation, "when I said those shots were impossible, I was thinking like a traditional military officer. You taught me that sometimes the best way to accomplish a mission is to ignore what conventional wisdom says can't be done." Maria appreciated the compliment, but she had learned to focus on future challenges rather than past accomplishments. "Sir, I think the real lesson isn't about making impossible shots. It's about preparing so thoroughly that nothing seems impossible when the moment comes." As her second year of teaching concluded, Maria received an unexpected offer. The Special Operations Command wanted her to join an elite training unit that would work with the military's most advanced snipers. The opportunity was tempting, but Maria had grown to love her work at Fort Benning. Every new class brought soldiers who would carry her lessons into combat, potentially saving lives through improved marksmanship and confidence. "Dad," she said during one of their regular phone calls, "they want to promote me and move me to an even more specialized program." Tom Santos listened as his daughter described the opportunity. "Mija, what does your heart tell you?" "I think I can do more good here, training as many soldiers as possible than I could working with just a few elite snipers." "Then you have your answer," her father said. "The greatest shot you ever made wasn't in Afghanistan. It's every shot your students make when their lives depend on it." Maria decided to stay at Fort Benning, continuing to develop and teach advanced sniper techniques. Her legacy wasn't just 3 impossible shots in a mountain valley. It was the hundreds of soldiers who learned from her that impossible was just another word for something nobody had tried hard enough to accomplish. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of sniper training, they would identify Maria Santos as a pivotal figure who changed how the military approached long-range shooting. But Maria preferred to think of herself simply as a teacher who had learned that the most important shot a sniper could make was the one that gave other soldiers the confidence to make their own impossible shots when it mattered most. The story that began with 3 incredible shots in Afghanistan had become something much larger, a new approach to training that emphasized confidence, preparation, and the willingness to attempt what others considered impossible. And in classrooms and ranges across the military, new generations of snipers continued to learn that impossible was just the starting point for excellence.